Hello and welcome to Broken Entertainment. So a while back there was a really nasty hit piece article on Brandon Sanderson, and it made the rounds all over social media and on YouTube and so on. And everybody rightfully was pointing out how terrible it was, because it really was just an absolute hit piece. You know, the guy came across like he went there looking for skeletons in Brandon Sanderson's closet, didn't find any and got mad about it. And I was going to do a video on that when it was happening, but Brandon Sanderson came back and told everyone, he said, don't go after this guy, don't attack him, just let the article be. And so I said, okay, fine, if that's the way he wants to respond to it, I will leave it alone. And then another article came out not too long after that by a different person in a different magazine, Esquire of all places. And it was totally the opposite. And it, being a positive story, got basically no coverage on the same channels that covered the negative article. Now, this is a really good article. I will put a link in the description for it if you want to go check out the whole thing. I don't want to go through all of it. It's very lengthy. Goes into a lot of really interesting detail. Great stuff. I do recommend reading it. But I want to talk about what Sanderson is saying of late, and it actually goes back much farther than the last couple years. It goes back, I think, about 4 years, when he had an interview by Shadiversity. And in that interview, Shad asked, if you were to start out, if you were starting your career now from scratch, if you were looking to publish your first book and so on, would you do it traditionally, or would you self-publish? And he said, I would self-publish. And he even went down, he said, and what I would do is I would write, I think he said about 5 books. I'm paraphrasing some here. It's been a while since I've watched the video, but I'd write several books and publish them all at once and continue publishing it as rapidly as I could, because then you have a backlog of books people can read, and when they see you, if they find you, they go, oh wow, this person's really prolific, they've published a lot of stuff, and it kind of lends you some credibility that you might not otherwise have, because it doesn't look like you just kind of spit out a novel and threw it up online. It looks like, oh, this person really is serious about what they're doing. And it really struck me that he said he would self-publish. And, I've thought about it over time, and that's part of why I ultimately have decided I will be self-publishing as well. Only a small part of it, because I thought he made some good points. And the other thing he said at the time was, we don't know how or in what form traditional publishing will be around in the future, if it will. So, very interesting. But nothing really came of it for a while, and then he did this Kickstarter where he raised $41 million by 185,341 fans. So you're not just talking about whales that spent a whole bunch of money, you're talking about a significant amount of people. And this is where it gets super interesting, and nobody talks about it. And part of it's because it's buried, the most interesting part is buried in this article. And I'm sure people have read it, but they probably just kind of glossed over it. Brandon Sanderson has made his own publishing company, Dragonsteel, and for the most part he's used it up until this Kickstarter to publish special editions of his books, stuff like that. Now, however, he used that publishing company to publish 4 books through Kickstarter. That also, he did not put the audiobook form on Audible, and that's a whole other story about how Brandon Sanderson is taking on Audible because he doesn't like their practices, which, if you're familiar with Audible, wouldn't be very surprising. So down here he says, I think some of the things traditional publishing companies do in New York are wrong-headed. He says somebody has to step up and say, here's another way. That is huge. We know that traditional publishing is struggling. We know that self-publishing is expanding. And we know that a lot of people still kind of want that prestige of being traditionally published. Even if they self-publish, a lot of people try to get traditionally published anyway. Because there's this belief by many that if you're traditionally published, you have automatic credibility. And if you're self-published, oh, you just weren't good enough to get through traditional publishing. Which is, of course, complete nonsense. Traditional publishing is heavily gatekept at this point, where they're looking for people of specific backgrounds. They're looking for people who have specific political ideologies, to the point of actually perusing through people's social media, making sure that they have the right ideas, so to speak. And here you have Brandon Sanderson, who published 4 books for $41 million to 185,000 people, saying, traditional publishing is doing it wrong. And if I were traditional publishing, I'd be squirming real hard right now, because Sanderson doesn't need them, as he proved, which I think was actually the point of the Kickstarter, to test whether or not he could break away from traditional publishing if he chose to do so. So then he continues, I tried for years to get New York publishers to do things differently, and they just weren't willing to. So I'm doing it my way. If it works, I'll show them that it works. And he says, and if it doesn't, I'll fall on my face. We finally have what has been brewing, I think, for years now. I have heard through various YouTube channels that are authors, traditionally published authors, and through articles and through interviews, numerous authors saying or hinting that they're not happy with traditional publishing. They don't like the way it's run. They don't like the hoops they have to jump through. One of those being the Chris Ferracchio, the author of the Sun Eater Chronicles, has actually had to... He got in an argument with his publisher and has taken his final books in this series over to another publisher. And you're seeing this discontent, but a lot of traditionally published authors are kind of trapped, right? Once you sign that deal, now they have publishing control of your IP. But Brandon Sanderson is strong enough, he's powerful enough in the industry, wealthy enough to go out and create his own publishing company with 64 employees, do this Kickstarter, make even more money that will easily go into his infrastructure. He is capable of saying, now this isn't working for me. And the fact that it hasn't made the rounds at all, that he's talking like this, is interesting. And I suspect for a lot of people, it just kind of flies by. They don't really think about it too much. But there is a fundamental shift in media and entertainment, and it is happening in almost every conceivable level. You have comics that are increasingly independent, being published on Kickstarter and Indiegogo. You have books that are increasingly self-published to the point that people are doing their own audiobooks. And you have people moving away from this Amazon model sort of to other things. You have Apple coming out with an AI narration software that is absolutely incredible, sounds exactly like a human voice. And you're seeing these changes and these little revolutions. And this is a big one. This is the first very public figure that was in the traditional model, deciding, I don't actually need the traditional model. And once you have somebody capable of pulling away from the traditional model, now you're left going, is traditional publishing what we think it is, as those people who are viewing traditional publishing as sort of this thing they need to accomplish as an author, whether they're self-published or not, thinking, I've got to beg and plead to get my book published. I got to go through agents, and I got to go querying for years and years with book after book after book, hoping to God that somebody somewhere will like what I'm doing and that my social media will pass all the special checks and I'll get into the traditional publishing club. Well, how much do you need that club if Brandon Sanderson is saying, this isn't worth it? This is being done incorrectly. And it's one thing for those of us who are independent and small to say these things. It's another thing for somebody who can throw out 4 books on Kickstarter and make the most money of all time on Kickstarter. This is a different level altogether. And the question becomes, what does he plan? We don't know a lot of what he's planning. And the question also becomes, is he planning an alternative publishing company that other people can get published through? Or is this entirely a model for his own work? And I think there is an answer to that in this article that's kind of not glossed over, but it's not focused on maybe as much as it should be. And it goes on talking about the different employees, and some of them are family, friends of the family, and some of them are just total strangers. And they're all these passionate people. I'm just a member of the Harry Potter generation, and I love fantasy, and this is somebody working for him. And it's wonderful to see that you see these people working for him who love what they're doing. They love the genre. They care about it other than from the perspective of some sort of perceived social clout or money they may make. So he talks about the warehouse. And they're already doing, they're doing a Dragonsteel convention. So they're doing their own conventions, not somebody else's. They're not going through the traditional channels. So to fulfill the Kickstarter, we had to double our staff. Most of my traditionally published books are sold through Amazon, and I have huge problems with Amazon. These are words, it's buried near the midpoint of an article that a lot of people haven't read. But this is a man who made $41 million selling 4 books. And he's saying, I have a problem with the traditional publishing industry, and I have a problem with Amazon. Again, as small people, as independents, it's hard for us to have an impact without a whole bunch of us banding together. But Brandon Sanderson doing it, I got a different story. They don't treat their employees very well, but if we do it ourselves, we know that people will be treated well, and that helps me sleep at night. Make a long assembly line here on the kitting floor, where we have empty subscription boxes on one end, all the merchandise in the middle, and finished pallets at the other. So he's got his own warehouse, his own publishing, his own merchandise. They're boxing it, they're shipping it out, all in-house. So then he talks about some of the issues in the traditional publishing company. And Sanderson's never one to kind of, when you saw about as strongly as worded as he's going to get with Amazon, he's not one to kind of seek open conflict. He's kind of a fence sitter most of the time, which, he wants to sell books, and he obviously knows how. He says, my New York publishers do a good work, but you get an art director who has to put out 350 books a year, and their profit margins are too tight to make books like this, Sanderson says, pointing to his team's luxurious version of Tress. One thing I think publishing is poorly equipped to deal with right now is letting people pick their price point. So, here he's talking about it from the perspective of selling rather than from the perspective of publishing, but it's all part of the same package. For years, he tried convincing the former president of Macmillan, John Sargent, to publish multiple editions at different price points, including leather-bound hardcovers filled with original artwork, and bundle them with ebooks and merchandise. But Sargent never budged. Instead, publishers sell hardcovers and ebooks at 2 separate products, plus paperbacks that hit the market months later, if the titles sell well enough. Sanderson says this punishes readers who choose to spend money to support the authors they love, even though they could pirate digital books or check out free hardcover copies from a library. They won't say it, but publishers get really excited by the idea we can get superfans to buy 3 copies of the same book, Sanderson says. But wouldn't superfans be happier if they could buy one really nice edition in all formats? Give them a bundle with the print book and the ebook. Reader-centric ideals will lead to long-term success for the publishing industry. Here, he's talking about a complete revolution in how the publishing industry sells books, where he's saying, what you're doing isn't working. It hasn't worked, and it's increasingly not working, but there's this modern way of selling that you could do, and that he is doing through this Kickstarter. And, does this change things for independent authors? Sort of, because it kind of gives you an idea, how can I sell my books? You can go through an Ingram Spark to get physical books. You can do ebooks. And maybe if you want to do this kind of thing, you can figure out how to do this bundle yourself. This kind of a bundle yourself. I don't know exactly off the top of my head how I would do it, but it's something to think about. And, if you want to save traditional publishing, which is, I think, actually what he tried to do originally, you have to change it on a fundamental level, not just the way it finds talent and publishes books, but the way it sells books. Sanderson turned Dragonsteel into an independent press and started publishing his own books. The Kickstarter didn't make us more money than just selling those books in New York would have, he says, because the overhead cost of fulfillment. But the statement, that's exciting. I start to wonder if he'll stop working with traditional publishers completely. But for now, and I think that for now is very important, I think eventually he's going to, whether he wants to or not. Sanderson says his ongoing franchises like Stormlight, Archive, and Mistborn will continue to be published by Tor Books, while his young adult line will stay with Delacorte Press and an imprint at Penguin Random House. I can talk. I like publishers, they do good work. Or I like my publishers, they do good work. My whole team's well is going to be dry at the end of the year because of this Kickstarter is pushing the limits of what we can do. He does have future crowdfunding campaigns in mind, however. We want to do the Stormlight Leatherbound as Kickstarters because we like offering goodies and rewards. I want to do a Hoyd storybook collection at some point. See, and here's kind of the thing, too. If traditional publishers don't want to publish special versions of books, he's going to go out and do it himself. And again, if you can find the means of doing that, if you can find a way to design a special edition book, spend the money, maybe you can get it done on Kickstarter, maybe you have the money yourself, whatever. You don't need traditional publishing to do any of it. Not all of this is easy. Not all of this is cheap. But it's there, in black and white, evidence that the traditional publishing industry is really not even necessary. Because what are they doing now that somebody else can't do? Well, you can buy, if you really want to, you can buy a printing press at home. Or you can go through an Ingram Spark. Or you can find people who will do small batch printing. Okay, and do the fulfillment yourself. You can find the artists and the people who can put together leather bounds and that kind of thing and do it yourself. Obviously, some of this is very expensive. Leather bounds, you're not going to get an Ingram Spark leather bound, although I think Ingram Spark does hardcovers. But there are ways to do it, and if you can build an audience, you can get that stuff paid for on Kickstarter or Indiegogo or whatever your preferred platform is. And that should be a goal. Build an audience, build enough people who like your books that you can start expanding. You can start doing stuff like leather-bound versions. Who doesn't want a leather-bound version of the book they wrote? And what he's doing, as much as scaring the traditional publishing industry, or at least he should be, and as much as pulling away and saying, I've got to change things, I think things need to be done better, he's also showing us you don't need traditional publishing at all. There is nothing they offer that you can't do. Now, traditional publishing means you don't have to become an expert in a bunch of stuff. You don't have to fund a bunch of stuff. But there are ways even around some of that. You can do this stuff without them. Marketing. Traditional publishing doesn't market. They make the authors market. Well, if you already got a market, you might as well do it for yourself. Not hardcover, physical copies. Ingram Spark, or people who will do small runs of 1,000, 2,000 books. You got to pay for it, then you fulfill it yourself. Now you have the customer service role that you can do. Okay, editors. Well, there's editors out there. They're on YouTube. They're on web pages designed around finding editors. There are whole services designed around independent authors finding editors. Well, I can't afford a copy editor or a line editor. Okay, well, there are programs out there that you can get that use artificial intelligence to run through your book and identify problems that you can fix. Will it be 100% perfect? No. But it's traditional publishing. No, there's typos everywhere. Oh, I would really like a hardcover. Well, there are ways to get hardcovers. There's ways to do everything. Cover artists. Okay, you know what? You can either get art from stock files, or you can buy packages of covers if you want to go the cheaper route. I think the more professional route, obviously the more expensive route, is to go and hire a book cover artist. They're quite good. Not cheap, but good. And again, okay, you don't need them for the cover art. You don't need them for reviews. You don't need them for distribution, because Ingram Spark distributes everywhere. If you're on Ingram Spark, you can also be on Amazon. You can go to your local independent bookstores if you go through Ingram Spark. Don't do it if you only go through Amazon. But if you go through Ingram Spark, you can go and sell to them and say, look, buy 5 copies of my book, whatever. You don't need them to be in bookstores. You don't need them to be on the internet. You don't need them for an ebook. You don't need them for a hardcover. You don't need them for leather bounds. You don't need them for marketing. You don't need them for editors. You don't need them for cover artists. And you don't need them for audiobooks. Because you can go out and hire the same people that they hire to do audio narration. You can learn to do it yourself. You can get somebody that you know that's really good at narration and do it. Don't get just anybody. You want good quality. Or, if you're willing, you can go to Apple, publish your audiobook on Apple, and use their AI narration service. So again, what do they give you? They take things away. They take part of your profit away. They take control of your IP away. They take rights to other aspects. If you were ever to get there where the book gets optioned, that kind of stuff, they take some of that. If they decide that you didn't sell well enough by some arbitrary margin, they can just say, no, you can't use these characters in this setting anymore. We're not going to publish it, but we own the publishing rights to it, so you're out of luck. It's actually where the Cosmere came from. So, do you need them to be well sold? Well, no, because we just found out in the Penguin Random House lawsuit, the average traditional published book sells about 10 copies. I think it's about 10. Very similar number to self-published. So they don't even give you that. And here's Brandon Sanderson showing you step by step. Not intentionally, but he's doing it. This is a model. It doesn't have to be your model, but it is a model that shows you if, again, Brandon Sanderson has resources you probably don't. Unless you're, a millionaire. Increasingly, nobody needs traditional publishing, and traditionally published authors are starting to figure it out. So one thing you can do to bring some credibility to your work in the eyes of readers is to create your own imprint. And it's not terribly expensive. You basically just need to fund an LLC, which is not super expensive. And again, none of this is free. I'm not saying it's free. If you don't have the money, you don't have the money. But you can form an LLC, which is what I'm going to do. Form your own imprint and stick it on the front of your book. Now you're a publishing company. Makes you look in the eyes of a lot of readers, oh, this person's not just throwing their name on the cover. And finally you have, all I can say is I want to do cool things that make the industry better for everybody. I'm trying my best to do them in a morally upright way while treating people well. So then they meet Dan Wells, Sanderson's co-host on the Intentionally Blank podcast, who's in the middle of playtesting a Cosmere role-playing game, the vice president of narrative, which basically just means I write books and stories. He says, referring to some top-secret future projects, including collaborations with Sanderson. So, this is the setup here that I think gets missed too. I think, now I'm basing it on what I'm reading. I don't have a smoking gun. I think his intention is to eventually publish other people, starting in-house. If Sanderson makes Dragonsteel another publishing company and does things the way he's talking about, that's real competition in a publishing industry that doesn't have any. Really. And I don't, it would depend on how he operates in terms of IP and that kind of thing. It would be real easy for him to get kind of pulled into the same groupthink as the rest of the industry by going through agents, which I think is archaic, going through the begging and pleading process and making people do all that. I ask whether he thinks Dragonsteel will change the book publishing industry for the better. If I can get some other authors on board to push for some of the same things, yes. He's going to publish other people. Dragonsteel will become a publishing company. And he wants to change the industry. And I think that is a good thing on every possible level. Even if you never intend to be traditionally published, the traditional publishing industry has to change. Because it's not working. It's producing books people don't want to read. It's ideologically driven. It's a bubble of, an echo chamber of people who are mostly the same gender, mostly the same race, and almost entirely the same political ideology. And they're looking for people who fit specific appearance requirements, gender requirements, sexuality requirements, and political ideology requirements. And then they go through sensitivity readers and say, well, this is what's wrong with your book. You gotta fix this. That's not politically correct. We've seen the damage those people have done to the likes of Roald Dahl. I think Sanderson doing this is huge. And I think the more people who start to realize they don't need the traditional publishing industry, the better. At no point in human history have more people had more access to the ability to get their ideas out into the world than right now. And for some reason, we're stuck in this idea of traditional entertainment. When you can make your own movies, you can make your own books, you can make your own audiobooks, you can make your own comics. Why stick to industries that haven't revolutionized themselves in decades? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you liked the video, please hit the like button. If you're not subscribed, please consider subscribing. Ring the bell for notification, and I will see you next time.